U.S. President Donald Trump has given Hamas an ultimatum to release all remaining hostages immediately, including all the deceased, warning that if they didn't do so, it would be over for the group. In a new social media post, Trump said only sick and twisted people kept dead bodies and further indicated that he was sending Israel everything it needed to finish the job and that not a single Hamas member would be safe if they didn't do as he said. The post came hours after the White House press secretary confirmed that the United States had been directly engaging Hamas in negotiations on the hostage release. SABC News correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease is in New York for us and joins us with the very latest on this specific matter. Sherwin, as always, thank you very much for joining us. Just weeks ago, we heard the president seek to take full credit for getting the ceasefire deal across, but now the change of heart. Why exactly is this?
Essentially, what the United States president is doing here is putting a spanner in the works of the very agreement that his team, working with the Biden administration, the painstaking process of getting that ceasefire deal across the finish line more than 6 weeks ago, taking credit for their efforts and now seeking to undermine that agreement. You would have heard him, Fundo, earlier this week, the Israeli authorities, Benjamin Netanyahu in the main, putting forward a new proposal in terms of that ceasefire agreement, seeking to extend it by some 50 days, but then with a qualification that at least half of the living and half of the deceased hostages that are still being held by Hamas be released on the first day of that 50-day extension. Of course, that is not part of the process that has been shepherded here by countries like Qatar, Egypt, and the United States in terms of that three-phased agreement, of which 6 weeks has now been completed on Saturday this past weekend. There was now supposed to be a second phased agreement where Israel would withdraw entirely its military from the Gaza enclave, and you would then continue to have the hostages released in a staggered fashion in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. That would then lead to a third phase ceasefire where all the remaining deceased hostages would be released in exchange for the beginning of the implementation of a reconstruction plan for Gaza. The sentiment change you're seeing from the United States president, I think, has to do with his dissatisfaction with the way in which Hamas has been releasing the hostages. He has talked about how they looked very emaciated, those living hostages that have been released, but also very critical of the parading of coffins that you saw in terms of the release and handover by Hamas to Israel, to the Red Cross, and then to Israeli authorities of deceased corpses in Gaza. So he's dissatisfied with how this process, the ceasefire process, has played out, and I think that speaks to his new position here in terms of pressuring Hamas. Of course, we'll have to see how that goes.
And what has been Hamas's response to that threat, if you will?
Yeah, I've just seen a statement from a spokesperson from Hamas. I'll read you a little bit of that. The reports are now emerging that Hamas has essentially, Mfundo, rejected the Trump threat. Hamas's spokesperson says the best path to free the remaining Israeli hostages is through negotiations on the second phase of the ceasefire agreement. Of course, we haven't seen the heavy lifting in terms of those direct negotiations, right? For the first phase, as it was playing out, as it was reaching the end, they were supposed to get the parties together again to decide on the implementation of phase two. That hasn't happened to the extent that this agreement initially endeavored to achieve. And now you have these new proposals being put forward by Israel, supported by the United States, and very threatening. I mean, if we just recap what President Trump is saying here, release all the hostages now, not later, and immediately return all of the dead bodies of the people you murdered, or it's over for you. Only sick and twisted people keep bodies, and you are sick and twisted. He's messaging here, of course, to Hamas. I'm sending Israel everything it needs to finish the job. Not a single Hamas member will be safe if you do not do as I say. I have just met with former hostages whose lives have been destroyed. This is your last warning for the leadership. Now is the time to leave Gaza while you still have a chance. Also to the people of Gaza, a beautiful future awaits, but not if you hold hostages. If you do, you are dead. Make a smart decision. Release the hostages now, or there will be hell to pay. This is a message to both Hamas and the Palestinian people in Gaza. And I can tell you this, Mfundo, the United States has already, since the Trump administration took office in January, delivered, or is in the process of delivering, some $12 billion in arms and ammunitions and military equipment to Israel. So when Trump says they're giving Israel everything they need to finish the job, is not joking.
When he speaks about Gaza and saying that the people of Gaza, a beautiful future awaits you, does it really await them? Because we remember what was stated around Palestinians possibly having to go to other countries, Arab countries probably taking them on. Does a beautiful future still await the people of Gaza beyond this war?
Mfundo, you haven't heard about the Riviera of the Middle East that
We've
the
heard
Trump
about the
administration,
Riviera.
Donald Trump in the main, is pushing here? The Riviera of the Middle East, of course, this is a plan that was flatly rejected by the countries he's seeking to move those Palestinians to, Jordan and Egypt in the main. You saw President al-Sisi in Egypt this week host the Arab League summit in which the UN Secretary General attended, and they are quite clear that there will be no displacement of Palestinians in terms of reconstruction. The Arabs are now going to be putting forward their own phased reconstruction plan for Gaza, which really repudiates this notion that Palestinians will be displaced from Gaza and that the United States would then come in and take ownership of reconstruction and development. That has been pushed back at, that has been repudiated by the Arabs, and I think more broadly by the international community writ large.
That's why it's quite interesting for him to say that to the people of Gaza, a beautiful future awaits you, when we've all been hearing about this Riviera. But quite interesting there as always. Thank you very much, Sherwin, for that reportage.